Good day and welcome to everyone that is here for the virtual roundtable coordinated by the IS-BAO Progressive Stage 3 team. Today's session is brought to you by IBAC and the IS-BAO and IS-BAO programs. We're excited to continue these IBAC Progressive Stage 3 roundtables where we're focusing on safety topics relevant to the global business aviation industry. Today, our panelists will be talking about organizational approaches to assessing safety culture. Before we get going, I just have a couple of housekeeping items to go over. All attendees are on mute for the duration of the presentation. That's due to the number of people we have. You are welcome and urged to submit your questions and comments during the presentation. You can type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will discuss them in the question and answer session after the discussion. We'll start today's presentations with a welcome from our IS-BAO Program Director, Andrew Karras. Andrew, I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Good day, everybody. Thank you for attending today's roundtable discussion about organizational approaches to assessing safety culture. For an organization to be efficient and successful, a strong continuity plan needs to be in place. At the heart of an organization's continuity lies the people and the safety culture that surrounds them. Also, disciplined adherence to procedures, policies, and preparation cements the cultural foundation within an organization. But how do you assess your safety culture? And once you do, how do you make necessary adjustments if an assessment suggests areas of improvement? Today, we have an outstanding panel of professionals within our industry to answer these questions, and we are excited to have them here today. Thank you all again for registering and for attending. Our panelists today are Sonnie Bates, CEO of Wyvern, Doctor of Philosophy and an expert in safety management and safety culture. Brian Teske, an airline captain and Doctor of Philosophy with expertise in corporate culture, flight safety, security, and compliance. Dan Cerkan is BAO auditor, airline transport pilot and rotary wing and fixed wing aircraft with expertise in safety management systems and corporate culture. And then our moderator today, Jad Donaldson, is a director of aviation for a Part 91 flight department in the Northeast United States with over 20 years in business aviation and a member of the IS-BAO Standards Board. Jad, I'll hand it over to you to begin the discussion. Thank you all again for attending.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you handing it off to us, and what a wonderful introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We've got a great topic here, one that I think touches all of our departments, and we've got an outstanding group of panelists to help us get through it. This is going to be more of a discussion, and we encourage you to send us some questions as we go along. Hopefully they spark some ideas and some thoughts that you might want to get some more clarity on, because we've got the right people to help with getting you that clarity. We're going to take a high-level approach today, and it's going to be one that I think is going to be fascinating to talk about. So we've all heard that organizations can reduce incidents and accidents by creating a positive safety culture. But really, what is a safety culture, and where is that culture born within an organization? I throw that out as a question to our panelists. Sonnie, what's your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Jad, and thanks to the IBAC team for the invitation and to participate today. And so what is safety culture? I think the FAA and most of the national authorities around the world anchor to James Reason's model. That model includes all kinds of elements that we'll probably bounce around during this conversation. But, you know, it starts off with a just culture. You have to have an element of a just culture where people trust the organization that they can report without being punished. And if you don't have that, you really can't go any farther. So that's the first thing you got to build, and probably hand it off to one of my colleagues here to maybe elaborate on some of the other elements.
Brian, Brian, you've seen a little bit of this. What's your thoughts on this, especially from a human factors standpoint?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation as well. You know, Sonnie did a good job of starting the conversation. If you look at James Reason's model, they include 5 components, and I'll go through those just briefly. Learning, informed, just, flexible, and reporting. And those are all important because all those components must interact together. Culture is the soul of an organization. If there's not trust between management and frontline and management, then safety concerns and safety issues will begin to happen. we see it in any organization, whether it's one, say 2 people, if you will, up to 80, 90,000 people. That cultural aspect is what drives safety. It's what drives compliance. It's what drives all the accountable measures.
Well, that's definitely critical. Dan, you probably see a little bit of this, especially from your experience in the auditor side of the house. But what do you see as the key parts of the safety culture, and what do you see in our industry as well?
It's kind of funny that you ask. As soon as I go into an organization at the opening meeting, I could tell you what the culture is going to be right away. Either that or walking on the hangar deck. People that are most successful in the audits that I've seen, all management positions are at the opening meetings. They care. And then, you just walk down a flight, the hangar deck, and if it's clean and organized, you kind of know how the audit's going to go. But from the get-go, it needs to come from the top. The culture needs to come from the boss, because if the boss doesn't care about the culture, nobody else is going to. So by all management positions buying into the culture, it goes down all the way down to the technicians and flight schedulers and everybody wanting to do better, wanting to be safe in what they're doing.
So we've got an overarching understanding of kind of that we got to have buy-in from management. But Sonnie, I know in your experience with what you do at Wyvern, you probably find times when you're trying to drive the safety culture from the bottom up. What can flight departments do when you're trying to get the culture up off the ground? Let's just talk about, keep it at the level of where is it born within the organization? We realize it needs to be at the top. What if it's not at the top? What if we have to try to get it? What are some things we could start to look at?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jeb, because, fundamentally we say, and it's true, that it really needs to come from the top. A CEO or accountable executive needs to show that they care, truly care in a meaningful way, engage in the safety meetings, engage in any of the safety activities they can to say, hey, look, I really am the number one advocate. I am the champion here in this organization. But that's not always how it works. We know it doesn't work like that in most organizations. And what happens in most organizations, if you have a person or two or several people that are influencers, and these people could be line people that are fairly new to the organization, but they have that charisma, they have that ability to motivate others to do the right thing. So wherever you can find these influencers, these are the people that can help promote a safety culture in your organization, because let's face it, we're all different, and that's a good thing. We all have our unique skills, and when we come together as a team, we know who those influencers are, and we need to motivate them, educate them, train them with these things that we are talking about today with regard to safety culture and safety risk management, so that they can help us promote with their natural charisma and capabilities.
So thank you, Sonnie. Brian, are we just talking about creating documents that we have to follow, or is it more than that? Is it deeper into when we talk about the safety culture and from the human factors side, how do we tap into that? And especially, what do we do from the mid-level? If, I don't foresee that a lot of CEOs are going to want to sit down into a safety meeting per se, unless they're asked to. I think it's incumbent upon the flight department leadership to make sure that the reporting executives are deeply involved in the safety culture. But if you're trying to build that, what kind of things from a human factor standpoint, Brian, can we add to that to help develop that safety culture even above us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So communication is going to be king, and finding out how, let's say, frontline employees or assessing or using the procedures, how those are going into place. There's a lot of theoretical components that can come into this. Psychological safety is one where anyone who has an idea, it's beyond just culture, but anyone who has an idea, it's applauded, even if it's right or wrong. But the point is that if you're gonna look for a change in the mid or the lower ranks, it has to have still buy-in from the top. So documents, yeah, those are compliance documents. Everyone has to have those. But there has to be give and take in communication. There has to be, it can't be just from the top down. This is what we're doing. You have to be aware of what is going on frontline. And to Sonnie's point is great. The safety leaders, they're sprinkled throughout your organization. So if you can identify those and then promote them in a way, not by rank, but promote what they're doing, that can help to solidify a culture, and it can take root. And in some organization where it takes root, then others will start to emulate that.
So you've got a way to take root. We've got a way to talk up into the organization if it's not coming down from the top, because we do need to have that high level communication, Brian, as you said, and Sonnie, as you pointed out, to getting the right people to pull it together within the organization. You've got the culture in place to a point where it's non-punitive. We talked about that. You need to have people that are willing to speak up and not be penalized for speaking up. And you build the culture around an open line of communication at all times, at all levels of the organization. So there's all of that piece going on. How do you maintain and adjust the culture once it's set? If you've got it built, what do you do to maintain it and then hold it in place? Brian, you want to take that one?
Sure. There's a researcher that has said culture takes years to build and seconds to destroy. So you have to, as an organization, once you're going in the right path, and it takes a long time depending on the size of the organization to turn the safety needle, but as you start to do that, you can't switch back to anything punitive whatsoever. You have to, of course, maintain operational standards, but it can't be perceived as a punitive nature. So how do you keep that going? You constantly talk, you constantly promote, if you will, or advertise what's going on in a certain area. You allow people to try. They have to have capacity to do their job. So meaning they have to have the ability to do what they do inside the safety parameters, and you promote those things. And then any leader, regardless of rank, that then is perceived as having some sort of punitive nature, that has to be adjusted by the higher ups.
So you're saying it's going to go, at some point, we're going to need full-on accounting executive on down to be able to step in. It's an interesting question, Sonnie. I'm going to throw it to you next. What do you do if you have a person within the department that's not supporting the safety culture? I think these are, you get into it's very complex. The human factors piece of a flight department can be very complex. Then you have a lot of different personalities, and we all know that there's a lot of type A going on. There's a lot of different ways to skin the same apple there. You can do these a lot of different ways, and some people perceive those as being safe and some don't. But what do you, if you've got a culture built and it's structured, but you've got an outlier, how do you, is there any way we can handle that? What's the best ways to deal with it, Sonnie? I mean, we do have a top down, obviously it's not punitive in nature, but if you've got somebody not complying, what do you do then?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that it almost feels like a loaded question. Like there's so many ways this could go, right? And I think one effective way to address the outlier, since you used that term, I'm kind of glad you did. Ask yourself, does your organization have clear core values? So your safety culture shouldn't be like this abstract thing you're trying to achieve. Your safety culture really should be in a really good alignment with your core values. Like at Wyvern, our core values include relationships and excellence and innovation and integrity. And we're thinking about changing excellence and integrity to professionalism. And the reason why I'm bringing that into this conversation, if you embrace professionalism and you embrace positive relationships, just those two core values, then you ask yourself, is this outlier, this person that's not getting it or not supporting it or not promoting it with us, are they even aligned with our core values? Are they a professional by the way we define professionalism? If not, maybe they're not a good fit for the organization. And that's one question that you have to address sometimes. But if they are aligned still with their core values, at least reasonably, and you feel like they can be educated, sometimes it's just a matter of having the ability and care for that person. If you truly care for that person in your organization, you'll ask why. Why don't you promote this? Why don't you believe it the way we do? And you might find out that there's something else going on. And one example that I can remember specifically is we had the naysayer in our organization, but we still felt like he was a good guy. And we sent him to one of these things like safety stand down in Wichita there for Bombardier. He came back a champion. And the reason why he came back a champion wasn't because he learned something new. It's because we proved to him that we believe in him and that we sent him away for a week and trusted him to come back and be the new voice for something new in safety. And then he became a champion. So it was something, we didn't even see that coming, but that's just one example.
So part of this is all about, it's experiential at some level too, because I've seen the same thing in other flight departments where you do have somebody who they don't have the experience of the industry. They haven't been to a safety stand down. They so that they're not engaged in the same way maybe as other people are who have experienced those things. And so they're not as tied into it. You guys bring up some great points about that. What kind of limitation? So here's another thing, and Sonnie, you brought it up. We talk about the safety culture being aligned within the organization. Are we talking about the flight department as an organization? Or are we talking about the greater corporation? We're business operators. Are we? I mean, Brian, you've got some experience with this. I mean, with your background, you do the airline side as well as understanding, obviously, the business aviation side. But Sonnie, I'll toss it to you for a second, Brian, and let you jump in. Do we need to be aligned with our corporations?
In the purest sense, yes. The corporation, the bigger organization, really needs to embrace safety culture and the attributes of it, because it really aligns with professionalism. When you look at safety management and safety culture, it's really quality with a safety focus. It's how do we always continually improve? How do we maintain professionalism? How do we maintain an open mind and have that psychological safety that Brian's talking about, where you're allowed to voice your opinion without being punished or making you feel bad because you voice your professional opinion? So it really should be, in theory, the bigger corporation, but we see that that's not the case. I've worked in the place that has the 90 warehouses around the world, OSHA's all over them because they have a terrible safety record, but yet the flight department is trying to be a champion for safety. So there is a dichotomy there.
Brian, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it should be enterprise-wide. So it should be all departments, and that doesn't happen. That's in a perfect world. The corporate safety professionalism, that should come all the way down to each department. If you're wanting to spread an idea through, you find areas where it is being done properly, where safety is being done properly. And I don't mean properly as in they're more safe. It's just you can look at how the employees are. You can get frontline feedback, understand in that area it's working. Flight ops generally has a lot more data. We've got FOCO, ASAP. We have all these other bits of data that come in, and we're used to analyzing those. The other departments are not, and they're figuring that out. So there's a lot of flight ops is really most times where the safety is at the highest levels, and we're moving along well. The other departments can learn from that as well, but it needs to be where you highlight where your successes are, and then you allow other groups to understand and to try to deploy those strategies.
So we try to build a safety culture from the top down. If we can't build it from the top down, we can bring it up from the bottom, but we need to do it through a high level of communication. Great parts on that, Brian and Sonnie. Thank you so much. And so then, you've got kind of the pieces. You need to tie it to your organization. I find it interesting in my years of experience. One of the things that can be a little frustrating is that our side of the industry, aviation in general, and as all professional aviators know, you're always talking about safety. If you're really worth your salt, I think that, in the back of our mind, everything is about what do we do with safety and how do we do safety. But then you try to interpolate that into an organization that doesn't have anything to do with aviation. We're a subset, usually an outlier, a part of the corporation that they don't know what to do with. Sometimes we don't even know who we're reporting to because it doesn't flow upstream. But we all know at the ultimate level, we report to the owner, the primary executive. We might even have an executive in charge who's reporting to the CEO, but ultimately we know the CEO is making the decision. I've had a CEO once tell me that he said, I said, safety. We had the whole safety conversation, and he said, and we had a great safety culture within the department, but he said, look, he says, Jad, safety is like oxygen to me. I just know it's there. I open my mouth, I breathe, my lungs fill up, I get it. Right? He said, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to be concerned about it. And so there's sometimes as leaders and as flight department members in a good safety culture, you're left trying to explain why safety is so important. And Dan, I'm going to throw it to you. You're in the auditor space and you see this from a lot of different perspectives. What are some things that you see maybe that are things you've seen that are good that some companies do to help coalesce that so that the organization understands the value of safety, but also it helps promote the safety culture within the flight department?
Sure, I've seen plenty of these things where the parent company believes in safety, they talk safety, but they don't understand SMS. Safety for them is OSHA. So how do you bring that up? How does that help? Education, I've seen some companies bring their executives down to the flight line, have a barbecue day or something like that, then explain what an SMS is, what just culture is, by just relying on an OSHA type program where you have to report. And if you report, you get punished for it. So breaking that out, saying, hey, this isn't a punishment OSHA program. This is a no joke. We're going to improve, continuous improvement. Let's hear your best ideas. Having managers come down and ask the guys on the floor, hey, are we doing what we should be doing? Involving them face to face, or even inviting them into your safety meetings. I've seen people use a rotating mechanic or rotating fleet pilot in and out of their safety meetings, so everybody knows, their points being heard and listened to. So I think gathering people and involving them in the process is probably your most important way of getting that culture going.
Well, and that's a great point. I was in a department once, and we were forced into certifying the flight department under ISO 9000 actually, because the company only understood that part of quality assurance, and it took a big undertaking to get them to understand that ISO doesn't relate to aviation, but in our case, IS-BAO did, and so IS-BAO we had our ISO auditors actually become understanding of IS-BAO and the protocols and how it works from a safety standpoint in SMS. So that helped us solidify our safety culture, also bottom up, but within the organization through a different channel to make that work. So we've got a safety culture in place. We're developing it, working to understand it, but maybe, now we need to look a little bit deeper. If we conduct a safety culture survey, are there limitations that we need to overcome, and what are some of the key elements that now we're going to survey? We're going to start to assess what our safety culture looks like. Sonnie, I'm sure you're involved in some of these assessments, and what is it? What are some of the key elements that we need to assess when we're looking at a safety culture within an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question, because one of the fallacies in our industry and basically in the world, when we look at safety culture, we think, well, we just send out a survey, look at the survey, if it's good, we got safety culture, we're done. And it's that the survey is just an instrument to get an indicator of what you think is going on, but how that survey is designed is super important. Most people use a Likert scale, but then there's limitations with a Likert scale. For example, if you select number 3, that means you don't have an opinion. I don't have enough information. I don't know. I don't contribute. But that affects the score. A 3 is not a 0. And so even I'm actually pushing back on some of the university studies that are used in the Likert scale, where somebody says, well, I don't have an opinion, so I'm scoring at a 3. Well, that should be a 0, because that's not an input. Why does that affect the score? That should just be tossed out, that question, for that person anyway. So there's all kinds of limitations with Likert scoring. There's limitations because the way this question is designed, you can ask the same question 5 different ways and you'll get slightly different scores, but it's the same question, right? So the survey design in itself is super important. And then I've seen lately where some organizations send out a safety culture, then they send back the organization of 5 people, all these statistical analysis, and it worries them like crazy. And it's like, it's only 5 data points. You don't have enough power there for statistical significance with 5 data points, right? And now the organization is overreacting to a survey because one person, the outlier, is not in agreement, and now that's affecting at least 20% of the outcome of this data. So surveys are good, surveys are important. Do them, but ask the questions. And what I would encourage people to do, just like Dan is talking about, when he goes on site to audit, these people aren't being audited cold. They know the standard. They implemented the standard. They understand the standard. When you're being surveyed for safety culture, go on Wyvern's website, IS-BAO's website, anybody's website that does this stuff for a living, and we have guidance material. download it and read it, you know, and what we use comes from the ICAO international community. Just get smart on it, and then ask your survey or whatever company you're using, why did you design it like this? Why this, why that? And just become like we tell people, own your training. You'll get your most out of your training if you own it. Own your safety culture too, and the way it's being assessed. But that assessment, the survey is just one way. There's 3 things you got to do. You got to go on site if you really want to see how people behave, do the surveys, and also analyze like Dan does when he goes on site and audits. What's the structure like here? Do they have the resources? Do they have the SMS 4 components and 12 elements? I know I said a lot there.
Can I throw in on top of that?
Yeah.
I see some people that do too many surveys as well. So then if you just keep kicking in the paper every month, 2, 3 months, then people are just going to pencil whip it and go. You have to have a strategic, point in time where you want to do it. Change of management 6 months after, whatever, to compare to surveys.
Brian, what do you see as some of the limitations are to that, or can you add some other color to this on a different perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sonnie's discussion about Likert or Likert scale of 1 through 5, 1 through 7, it's spot on. So it doesn't really have the ability to give that nuance that you're looking for. I tend to use 7, some use 5 in my research. I did some safety culture safety work for commercial space organizations, but I want to go back to something and then go forward. Every member, no one wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go and not be safe. Everyone wants to be safe. They also want to feel part of a team. They want to feel part of that overall team. So there's an emotional component to safety, and if that's translated to rank and file, that then helps the organization move forward. Surveys can be great information gathering, and they can also be worthless. To Dan's point, survey fatigue is what it's called. If you put them out every week, pretty soon it's going to be pencil whipped, and you're not going to get reliable data. But it depends on what you're trying to measure. If you're trying to measure a change, which would be longitudinal, so a length of time, then you would do it maybe every 6 months to a year. If you want to just see how things are going, you could have a QR code in a break room, and people can do a survey on the go, and you're collecting data in the aggregate, and you're just looking at where things are at. Those are 2 different ways to do that. When it comes to safety, it has to be anonymous. There can't be anything tied back to an individual or to a base or an individual, and it needs to be easy and quick. It has to be 10 minutes or less, or 15 minutes. It has to be, to Sonnie's point, the questions have to be very easily understood. I like to have, when it comes to safety, I like to have the input from the text input from the survey taker. So it doesn't have to be long. It can be, how's the safety culture in your area? And it may be, it's great. Okay, fine. Then I can at least, it puts me in an area that this is not a longitudinal study. This is just kind of how things are going with rank and file. But we tend to overdo surveys. And to Dan's point, you can survey you can continue to survey to get the data that you want. You need to be very specific and tactical in how you do it.
So what is the right frequency for a survey then? What should we be looking for, or are there triggers that trigger a survey? Maybe that's a better question.
I think it depends, but for me it depends, because if the survey is short, like at Wyvern, we use a weekly survey just on human performance, and the first question is, how do you feel this week? Because to Brian's point, a lot of this has an emotional component. How do you feel about your organization? How do you feel about your team? If you're feeling kind of down about that for whatever reason, that's just a general sensation that can affect your performance. And so we ask that question. It's the first question on our weekly human performance survey at Wyvern. How do you feel this week? And when I reviewed them last week, I'm like, oh, I'm seeing some down. What's going on? And I reach out. I'm like, hey, what's going on here? And well, I don't feel like we worked together as a team last week like we did the weeks prior. That the team didn't meet my expectations. I was operating with a lack of information. So all these kind of things come out with just one general question, and that's a weekly question. But to Brian's point, if it were a 30-question survey, we wouldn't do it once a week, right? We would do that more like a quarterly or semi-annual basis. But it comes down to the design, and really this is quality with a safety focus. Ask your team, what do you want? I'm serving you. I'm servant leader. I want not to overtask you with surveys. How do you want to be able to answer the question, do we have a safety culture? And if they're educated and trained on the concept, they'll let you know.
So, Brian, build the survey internally, or do we use external resources to help us deliver that survey to the team?
Well, that depends. So both are correct answers. So, but regardless of if you go externally or internally, somebody has to look at it and say, this is asking what I want it to ask. And Sonnie's point is spot on. You ask one question, you get data points, and it'll lead you in a direction that you may not think has an issue, and it uncovers something that's in the culture, in the safety performance that you need to look at. The original question was how length of time. It depends on what you want to measure. 6 months to a year, quarterly. It depends on the length. Again, 10 to 15 minutes is the length of time a test should take, so our survey should test. So if it's a Likert scale, you're ticking a number, that's pretty quick. If you're filling in 1,800 characters, that takes longer. There's less questions. So it depends on that. One thing I wanted to add with surveys is just you're gathering data from frontline employees. So as a management team, you set what operational standards are there, and then you want to measure, are those standards or are those procedures being followed? You can do that with learning teams. You can do that with small groups. You can do that with surveys. There are it depends on the budget. There are many ways to do that.
So you've tied into something interesting, Brian, and Sonnie as well, and I think Dan, you'd agree. But the quality of the team versus the quality of the safety culture. Talk about that a second. And does the team mean it's a better safety culture, do you find? Or having a good team, how do we tie those two together? Because we've talked about team a little bit, and I believe this is a team sport. This isn't tennis, and it's not golf. So we are playing a team sport out there. And I find that in departments where the team is pretty solid, it's interesting. Maybe the safety culture is pretty solid too. But maybe that's because there's a high level of trust. Your thoughts on that?
If you don't mind, I'd like to jump on that right away, though. So Jad, and I know we didn't talk before this, so it wasn't a primed question, but that's what my study was from the university, just finished up recently. We looked at James Reason's model and said there seems to be something missing that should be here. So we looked at Eurocontrol, EOS, and some other studies around the world, and they had the teamwork component. So we added the teamwork component to safety culture as one of the sub-elements, and then we measured teamwork and overall safety culture. Teamwork is the biggest factor in a safety culture from our study. If you had a solid and professional team and a positive team, you could account for 42% of the overall safety culture in our study. There's limitations of the study, but in our study where we had thousands of data points and recipients in the hundreds, and put all that data together, it was amazing the power of teamwork. And then we asked the question, well, how do you get teamwork, right? And that's where what Brian was talking about, the emotional component. We can compare that with emotional intelligence. But I think you're onto something, Jad, there. Strong teams, strong cultures. But you could also have a strong team that has a negative culture, but they're still a strong team, And so it depends.
Brian?
Yeah, Sonnie answered it very well. You can have a strong safety department area, I should say, within an overall corporation. That doesn't mean that the corporation has a strong safety culture, but it goes back to this leadership component of culture. If you've got good communication, you have empathy, you have an understanding, you have those components, then you'll start to see that people feel part of a team. This is just one component of a safety culture, but it's large. No one wants to be an outlier. Nobody wants to be not part of the team. Everyone wants to be their opinions respected. And regardless if you have 1 minute or 100 years with the company, it doesn't matter. Everyone brings something to the table. So from an operational standpoint, yes, you may find it in one particular base or one particular department, or you might find it in a corporation. That's the answer for that. But if you can highlight that, it will grow.
Great points, both of you. Dan, you're out there, you see it in the field as well. would you agree that you're seeing more where there's, I mean, Sonnie actually did his work on this, and there's a lot of proof about it. Do you find many teams are having a better safety culture than when they're a good team involved, or what about whether maybe it's, you know, maybe it's the other way, maybe it's a good team but the safety culture's, you know, that, you know, I had it once told to me by one of my colleagues in the industry, and he goes, well, you know, that department's a good team, but they're flying like a flying club instead of like a department. So the safety culture wasn't really deeply ingrained. Dan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the most successful companies I've seen, the team, the pilots, the management, they all enjoy working together. You know, going someplace that people enjoy going to helps build that culture and that team. I've seen the opposite too, where you had your outliers, which actually brought down the culture of the organization enough that it wasn't an effective SMS. But yeah, having everybody doesn't have to like each other, right? And that happens quite often. But being able to, get together with your teammates and talk about things and discuss opinions. Because SMS is not just about putting in safety ideas; it's about business improvement, right? So, tell me what you want to do. How are we going to improve what we're doing here? Making people part of it. But strong team's the most important part I've seen, along with to enhance your safety culture.
All right, so we've dug in a bit to the safety culture, how to build it within the organization, kind of the key elements that make it good. We've talked about the importance of teamwork. We've talked about conducting surveys and don't over survey and the right reasons for doing the survey. You've got data now, you've pulled the data in, and you folks are great data analysts. So how does the organization interpret the results once an assessment is concluded? What do you do with those results? And I know that's a bit specific to, well, what are you actually surveying for? But what do you find in the broader picture? How do you execute on the things that come through your survey and the results of that survey once the assessments are concluded?
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, Sonnie. You make changes. You listen to what your rank and file is saying. It can be that simple initially. They point, if the preponderance of the information points to a certain direction, you make that change, and you make those adjustments. You're listening, you're responding. That goes back to the overall team mentality. If you survey people and they mean the results point to a particular change that is needed, and you say thanks but no thanks, your safety culture will diminish dramatically. No, you will not get positive feedback. Things will not change. Procedures will not go. It's a perception of whether the frontline employees doing the work feel valued.
Yep, and I agree with what Brian just said there. And also, I think when you get your survey results, whether the survey was built internally or externally or a mixture of both, it's time to have the conversation. Like, what is this telling us? Did we get the measurement, the answers that we expected? Is this a surprise? Is it a valid feedback? So you want to validate, make sure that this instrument is giving you the information that you can really act on. We don't want to act on bad information, but I think the survey, just like IS-BAO does and other standards do, once you put them on the table, that gives you something to anchor to for a conversation. Let's talk about just culture. Let's talk about information flow here. Let's talk about trust. Let's talk about our awareness now. And then through that conversation, you can say, I think regardless of what the survey might be telling us exactly, we scored a 4.2 out of 5. I do think that we're uncovering during this conversation a vulnerability in our organization with regard to information flow. And I see that quite a bit. Information flow, there's a lot of vulnerabilities to it. Organizations that live by email die by email, because the information goes out there scattered to some people. Other people didn't get it. The new person hired next week doesn't see any of that. And so we need a better information flow.
All right, so I get all that. So now I'm going to bring the elephant into the room. And we had a great question come through from one of our attendees. We've done surveys. We've got a culture built. We believe the culture is good. We've surveyed. We've updated it. We've had an accident. Accidents occur. What's the value? what, if any, feedback do you have on the value of the surveys when there's been an accident and you've been doing the surveys before, but now you know, I'm a safe flight department, I run a safe operation, but on this day, you know, we had our worst day come to pass. What's your thoughts on that? That's a loaded question. It's a big question, and Brian, I don't mean to put you and Sonnie and Dan on the spot, but you know, we talk a lot about safety, and at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're trying to talk about mitigating accidents and taking the human factors out of the things that, you know, we make mistakes and you know, that could happen. Does it diminish the reason for surveys? Let's get to a question here. Does it, no. You know, why do we do the survey if we've had an accident type thing? Take me through that.
You might have to separate the two, right? You might have to take a look at the accident. It depends if it's willful non-compliance or something else, or maybe you have uncovered a weakness in a procedure. Survey information is always more data. Data is good, and the more data you have, if you're asking the right questions, then that's a good position to be in. But when it comes to an accident, you may need to, as you go through and unwrap the accident, you may be finding whether procedures or policies, again, let's say it's not willful non-compliance, because that's a different topic. But you may find that there's a weak signal that you need to identify, and a weak signal is something that's negative, but it's too small to really show itself on a regular basis. But you might start to uncover something. You then can, depending on the size of your flight department, you can then take that via survey instrument and get more input and discover something that's more valuable.
Yeah, and I think too, I'm glad you asked the question. It's a great question, Chad, because just because you have an SMS and it's effective and your culture is positive and healthy, doesn't mean you're immune to an accident or a serious incident. What does make a difference, if you do have an effective SMS and you do have a healthy safety culture, that if you do have that serious incident or accident, you're better prepared to respond to it. You're going to dig in and do an investigation that's going to uncover the root cause or causes and help you make sure you take action to never let that similar thing happen again. So it builds resilience. You'll better survive the event. You know, if your organization is resilient enough, that is. But you're in a better situation. But the point is, this is a human endeavor. We are never free of error. We are never free of mistakes, and we are never free of faults and other kinds of anomalies in our aviation system. And that kind of reliability that we have every day sets us up for complacency. And so we just need to be on guard for that.
Dan, your thoughts on that? Because you probably do a lot of either audits or surveys.
Well, coming from an organization that's had many crashes back in the Marine Corps, always thought it's valuable to collect data right after a crash. Because once again, like the gentleman already talked about, you're right, maybe identifying some gaps that weren't known previously, or even underlying factors that hadn't been reported. You know, the techs were probably, oh, I knew that was going to happen. Tell me why you knew this was going to happen and how come we didn't solve that before. You know, you're part of it, but yeah, I think you get some really good data right after an accident. Not the next day, right? Maybe a week or two later, where you're going to find things that were not known previously.
Okay, so it's not the accident's not a reflection of the survey, obviously, because we all know that we're not immune to accidents, even if you're surveying. But what the survey does do is it gives you the tool and the basis and the construct of the culture to be able to come back after an accident and properly identify maybe where there was a problem. Obviously, somebody's woefully not doing the right things, then and the accident occurs, it becomes fairly obvious. But maybe there's more nuance in there that a cultural survey might have been able to identify prior. It's still not going to guarantee that you're not going to have something horrible happen. We have another question that's come in, and I'm just going to tap on this for a second because I've felt this before in another organization. Let's say our safety culture, it's mature. It's a mature culture. It's been around for a long time. We've been through a lot of different things. You know, maybe it's 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe it's been around even 30 years and evolved and gotten really good. But now it feels like it's gone flat, right? We're trying to keep it refreshed. We're trying to get back into it. What are some things we can do to kind of re-energize? I always say that, when you get to a point of building a good safety culture, you've got everything in play. It's all functioning very smoothly. It's not the ton of paperwork. You're not having to fill out a lot of things by and large. You're documenting what you do, but you know, it's not difficult at that point. You're just running a really core good business for your organization and doing a great job at running aviation. But that being said, it does feel sometimes like it gets a bit mundane or that it starts to wane. How do we re-energize the safety culture? And I know I'm diverging a little bit from where we're at, but let's say we've got it, but now we want to get it to the next level. Let's pull it back together again. What are some things we can do to kind of get it sparked?
Well, safety, the constructs of safety are always changing. And I'm sure Sonnie, my research showed it, Sonnie's has, and Dan has seen it in his audits. An organization that has a mature safety structure, that will become stale over time. So you have to constantly look at new elements and add new things in. We're looking at preventive. Are you looking at reactive data or proactive data? Are you trying to determine from the front line? There's a term, the pointy end of the stick and the blunt end of the stick, and what that means is the pointy end, if you will, like a pencil, it does the work. It's the frontline employee, and if there's no eraser, the back end is the policy, it's management. So there can be a disconnect between the two. Always emphasizing, I'll say team values, but it's deeper than that. But that's really the emotional component that's there. People want to feel part. They want of the group. They want to feel that their inputs matter.
Sonnie, any thoughts on that, or Dan?
Well, I had just a couple there. You know, sometimes, like, we use the term safety culture because that's what this is all about, but really we're talking about organizational culture, and that organizational culture, how much do they value safety, right? And that's kind of the way I think about it. So when a culture goes flat, it could be more than just the safety culture. It just could be the basic culture of the corporation or organization. And maybe it's time for a team event, you know, go to the leadership conference, take a group of people and go to the leadership conference, come back all charged up, and maybe that kind of energy will help you blossom in a new way as a team. But, you know, when things go stale, there is a clear indicator that we need to send somebody to get some refreshing training and get back and energize us. Send those centers of influence, those people that I was talking about earlier that are good at energizing people, and get them fired up and get people back into the organization and refocused. There's all kinds of things, because teamwork is so important. Now we can talk about psychological safety. We can talk about conflict management. We can talk about really effective communication versus not. All these what we call essential human skills like emotional intelligence. Let's bring those to the table and have a conversation. I think that will help energize and re-energize a team.
I also think you could look at your training programs, your crew resource management, your human factors. Are we still doing the same program year after year after year? You know, Let's try to switch it up. Threat and error management. Let's look at some other programs out there that just to refresh what we've been learning instead of doing the same stuff time after time after time. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dan. I've seen that in some other departments where they add upset recovery, and they're doing some deeper, some more advanced work around all of that, and being very inclusive. I would also add that, and maybe you would all agree, and a lot of times we have a safety manager in each department who's our champion and our spearhead for the safety manager position. Keep that position moving through multiple different people so you get better input on that. Would you all agree that bringing somebody else to the table, like you said, Sonnie, Brian, you pointed out, it re-energizes the team. It gets some fresh thought, some fresh look, and somebody who's taking the role on and going after it. So, you know, you get the results. You've done the surveys. You're either, you know, you're looking at your organization internally as your safety culture, or it's almost synonymous with your departmental culture. Can you adjust? Can you adjust the safety? I mean, if there's some, let's say some big things are kind of pointed out, and would you have any examples of adjustments that departments have had to make within their safety culture, and has it been successful? I mean, have you ever found? Let's ask this question: have you ever found where they can't adjust? Does that ever happen where things just don't get adjusted?
That becomes a leadership issue then, right? That's directly tied to who's at the top. I was going to point out later, but Alcoa is a great example of a company that took their safety culture and made a massive adjustment. And the CEO at the time was Paul O'Neill, mid 2000s. And so that's an example of a CEO that came in and said, I want to view safety differently. And in doing that, and this is really the thumbnail of it, in doing that, then changed not only safety, employee engagement, but that led to profitability as well and shareholder value. So there are, this is a longer discussion, but there are those components. But it can be, if you are a department within a larger corporation and you have these great ideas, and you're doing well, it may or may not be adopted depending on how that's viewed from the higher ups.
So then, let's say you do get it. Is there any examples? Alcoa was a good one where they made an adjustment. Is there any other examples of where you've seen them make adjustments, even in some other areas that were highly successful?
One of the things, without using a case study like Alcoa, which is a great example, I mean, I'm kind of going a bit granular here, but typically when we do a safety culture survey at Wyvern, we'll also do that in parallel with a basic aviation risk survey, which just asks 11 questions, with regard to your risk for collision in the air, collision on the ground, fuel starvation, these kind of things. Flight Safety Foundation, has identified 11 basic risks. So on the one hand, you get the safety culture survey. It's like, oh man, we're getting great scores over here. But on this score over here, it's like, but we still have some issues apparently with regard to fuel management and collision on the ground. What's going on here, right? I'm seeing two different pictures. And so by not just, I guess, having your safety culture survey in a vacuum, you could also enhance it with a specific survey about real risks that you might be facing to see if there's a disparity there between perceptions. But I think, yeah, I've seen the organizations look at these two different surveys. It's a total of like 30 questions with the two of them, and make specific adjustments with regard to like their fuel management. They're like, okay, yeah, we admit it. Sometimes we really push the fuel. So let's look at our requirements with fuel planning. Maybe we are too much leaning on the FAA's requirements and not doing more of the best practices. Things like that.
Dan, is there anything that you would add on that, on what you've seen from the audit standpoint? Maybe you're catching things, or you're seeing organizations that have them. Are they making the changes? Is it happening, or is it being are they struggling to move it forward, move the needle?
I think obviously you see it both ways. Like Sonnie just talked about, those are successful organizations that are making the changes. I see this mostly in, you could call it mom and pop, small flight departments where you only have 2, 3, 5 people. And sometimes it's really, really difficult to re-energize something with the same folk time after time after time. But to Sonnie's point, you do have to figure it out, whether you're the AE or the safety guy. How am I going to swap this up? How am I going to change it? How am I going to get more involvement from everybody? That's usually doing team building activities, with a scope on safety.
So here's a question that just came in. I thought I'd throw it out there to you. If an assessment identifies a continuous relationship, any advice for dealing with that? See if I have got that right. Yeah, contentious, sorry. If an assessment identifies a contentious relationship, and you have one inside there, I read that wrong, I apologize. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the contention?
I've seen a lot. Really,
yeah, and so that's the easy part. If you look at it from a leadership standpoint, a lot of times what you'll do is start scheduling different things, but that doesn't fix the problem, does it?
No. Not always. There's going to be conflicts with people all across everything we do. It's just and Brian, you're probably better qualified to talk about this than I am. How just it can't be, if it's not selective scheduling, not through team building. Do we just push out these guys and gals as far as we can so that they're not butting heads all the time? And how do we do that? We're all coming out of COVID. Is everybody back in the office, or are people still working out of the house? That's things to look at.
Go ahead, Sonnie.
Well, I was just going to say, this ties back into what you were talking about earlier, Jad, about the value of teamwork. And then when you break that down, we really need to learn how to manage conflict You know, in the organization, these contentious relationships really are perceptual. Most of the time, it's like, well, I think he's out to get me. He's always countering my views right in front of everybody. He's always showing me up when I'm making a mistake. And so the person is perceiving threat. And as soon as you perceive threat, now you have conflict. And what we need to learn how to do, and I do this in my personal life, I'm screwing up every day. And then I have to relearn these good behaviors that are like, you know what, when I don't feel good when somebody does a certain thing, I need to learn how to say, hey man, that hurt, why'd you do that? You know, and they go, what do you mean, what'd I do? And then it becomes more of a, you know, let's bring the tension down and let's try to make it a little bit funny, let's make it lighthearted, but let's still address it. And there's so many different tools in the toolbox to manage conflict, but we don't do that. We don't do that well.
Yeah, I agree, Sonnie. I think if you're identifying a contentious relationship, you might need to look at that leadership in that area. If there's not the perception of psychological safety, people feel they can say what they want, they're not part of the team, and this all goes directly to the emotional intelligence component of that group. You may need to look a little bit higher up the food chain and see why that's not there.
Yeah, and I don't know that. I mean, would you agree, Brian? You know, part of that can be handled at the inside the department. You know, at the root level of the safety culture. It doesn't. Certainly, you're going to need leadership to be on board. You're going to need that. But I also find too that if you bring it to light, and I think Sonnie, you're talking about the same thing, Dan. If we're all talking about it, you can level the playing field if everybody comes to the table and has the discussion, right? You have contention in the department. Maybe it's time to have the meeting with everybody present. Say, okay, voice your opinion. What is it that why are you being so contentious with everything? Or what things are bothering you that is bringing you to the table? You know, the thing is, we're all human. We had a drive to work and it didn't go well. And so you showed up at the bottom of the steps to get on the airplane. You were upset about how that happened. And the next thing you know, it's leading into the flight deck. And then the guy next to you is not running the checklist the way you think he should or she should. And then you're all upset about that. And it leads to contention. Is it deep or is it something on the surface? I think that's something, but communication's probably going to help you handle that faster than anything if you can get it that way. Certainly if somebody's deeply contentious, then, you know, it's going to become a bigger problem that's going to have to be handled.
I think it's important too for us safety champions not to come across as people who are trying to change the rule too quickly, especially, you know, I've been at fault here where I've been a safety manager in a corporate flight department. The director of aviation been in his job for 20 years. In his perception, everything's perfect. Now, who is this person always saying that, well, we need to fix this, we need to fix that. Our manual has holes in it, using all these terms we haven't heard before. You know, we with Swiss cheese in this and Swiss cheese in that, and all of a sudden they feel offended. Like, no, I'm a professional. This is a professional organization. Don't point out every day where we're broken. You know, so we need to be careful how we communicate and make sure that we're playing together very friendly, like with the team. We just got to get that buy-in from the top, you know, to make sure that they're understanding and supporting us.
Trust is a key component. If you have a contentious, if you have a situation that you need to adjust, it's that trust within that group. It doesn't have to be up the food chain beyond the department. It could be a shift leader. It could be it's a lot of it's awareness, back to Sonnie and Dan's point. It's awareness of what's going on, and then from that, then adjustments are made.
Understood. Well, I'll tell you, we're coming down to the end. I don't know that we have just a second. Let me just look at okay, here's a question that came in. We've got just a couple minutes. How many the question is, how many minimum respondents are appropriate to accurately assess the safety culture in an organization? Is there a number? And if there is, what is it? What's the minimum number that you need to have for getting the respondents? Now, understand too that, what is it? 85% of our industry is small operators, you know, and we're talking to the 15% of the industry that's probably larger operators. So what do you think that is? And this is going to be a big question for a short period of time, but what's the minimum respondents that you would want to have?
Well, just for fun, ask whoever sent that question, because it's a great question. Google the heck out of this. How many respondents do I need? How many participants do I need for statistical significance? And you'll get a myriad of answers. But, you know, for statistical significance, you're hardly ever going to get enough in a small organization, right? It could, because there's like 3 or 4 or 5 people in the organization. So that one person, that one data that's off the norm is going to skew the information. So good luck if you're a small organization. If you're a large organization, you need at least 100, you know. But we're not. That's not our audience we're talking to today. Our audience we're talking to, Jad, to your point. So there's not a good, in my opinion, there's not a good answer, because we're talking to organizations that are 10 or less people, and good luck getting statistical significance with that.
So you have to factor,
10 times.
Go ahead.
10 times the number of questions you ask is generally is in along the lines what Sonnie is saying. It's going to be really tough with a small group, and maybe a survey. Maybe you start with a survey and then you pivot from a survey to a learning team, meaning it's more of a group interaction to get the data you need.
Right. So that pulls it all together. Well, look, everybody, thank you so much for your time today and allowing me to moderate it. I hope that we've answered some questions. We've certainly gotten some great questions from our viewers today. And Andrew, at this point, I will hand it back to you for closing remarks on today's discussion about organizational approach to safety culture.
No, hey, thank you, Jad. Thank you, Brian, Sonnie, Dan, for joining us, and for all the attendees that joined the webinar roundtable today. Outstanding discussion, and Jad, thank you for moderating today. Thank you, everybody, again for attending. We appreciate you being here. There will be a short survey after the webinar, and I thank you in advance for your feedback. We're all on the quest for continuous improvement, so looking forward to continuing these discussions as the year progresses and beyond. And thank you all again. This will be posted on the IBAC website for anybody that wants to review it or wants to pass it along to any colleagues or industry partners with them. So thank you all again, and appreciate your time. Have a good day.